banks in Africa, right? And by hacking these banks, and that there were just so many banks that had wide open security that he just raked in money. He said it was like fishing with a big net, right? And I started thinking about that. I started thinking about how much technology was going to change in my lifetime, in my kids' lifetime, when I eventually had kids, and that people were not going to be prepared, right? People were not going to be ready for these challenges, right? They were not going to be ready to defend themselves. And so for me, that was the moment where I said, you know what, I should go into that. I should start looking at cybersecurity. I should start figuring out how to keep people safe. So how did I get there? This is kind of funny. Like I ran into a colleague at the RSA conference a couple weeks ago, and I'd been working with that guy. I worked with him 15 years ago at this startup that was purchased by McAfee, which was then purchased by Intel. And he was reminiscing about, he's like, I remember when you came to work for us, you were working at a graphic design company doing this network security. And so I was thinking about how I got to the point where I'm doing cybersecurity. And so it's really a sequence of kind of happy accidents. So I was working a stock clerk at an office supply company, and then their computers went down, right? They couldn't process any orders. And this was, this was a while back, and so nobody knew what to do, right? Nobody even knew how the whole system worked. And so I said, oh, I'll figure it out, right? And went into the back, in the back room, and it was an old Unix mainframe, right, mini mainframe, that was actually trying to communicate to their head office, and there was just this really complex sort of procedure around. And now when I look back on that, it was a really janky setup. There were so many points of failure in that, but nobody knew how to do any better, right? And so I went from being that stock clerk into, they said, oh, Bruce knows how to use computers. Let's have him work on our purchasing, right? So I would get up every morning at like 6 in the morning, and be at work at 6 and do like process orders, right? Process orders for for all of the art supplies for this company. And it was interesting because I found out early on that you could macro the system, right? You could write a very easy macro, and I would just sit there, and if I had to change, I would be given this big list of prices that I had to change. And so I figured out, okay, I can hit a button, program a macro to get to this point where I change the price, then hit another macro after that to take me to the next one. And I was doing it for about a week, and this lady that was just very, those people that like to tell or, like to tattle on other people, she goes, I don't know what Bruce is doing all day. He just sits there and pushes 2 buttons for hours, right? And then my boss was like, yeah, but he's done more in these 3 days than anybody, would do in 2 months, right? And then it became evident that there were, systems that you could use, right? And so I kind of kept going down this path of getting into a situation where, a little bit of creativity and a little bit of knowledge and a whole lot of lack of fear of messing things up really kind of helped progress my career. My favorite title, so Spider was a pretty good one. That was a fun title. But my favorite title, I actually made this one up at the company, which was Technomancer, which again goes back to Neuromancer, right? And that job was fun because it was, I was working with these large companies. I was working at a graphic design company, a web design company. And my job was to take these big back-end infrastructures for companies like Chevron or Disney or whatever, and figure out how to plug them in to the interface, the nice, pretty interface that our designers were making. So they all thought that was magical, so I thought Technomancer was a good title, because it sounds kind of magical. And it just kind of goes on from, going from one role that, has a very steady baseline, figuring out ways to do it better, or ways to try things differently, and that kind of opened up doors to go and do other things, right? So I went through a stage of, doing, actual research, researching. We had this product that did system and API call interception, right? So very low level security. So we would accept a call on its way to the page table and see if it was, actually going to the right address, or if it was an exploit, they were trying to get it to jump to another address and do a buffer overflow. And then I went through all of these things, ended up in Japan for a few years as a technical director, which was basically talking to these large Japanese companies and figuring out what they actually were asking for. Because what you'll find is that people will say, they find out about the latest technology, right? At the time, it was sandboxing, right? So there's this whole concept of you find a new file and you open it up in a sandbox to see if it's actually going to run an exploit. Everybody was like, we need a sandbox, we need a sandbox. I'm like, no, you need a firewall, or you need a network IPS, or something, right? And so I started figuring out ways to like help people, right? And that was always my goal as I was going through my career, is figuring out ways to make people's lives easier. And so the Cybersecurity and Privacy Director is really just a fancy title for an engineer that they put in front of people to talk, right? I changed my focus recently, maybe about a couple years ago, to focusing on the consumer, on the end user, right? Historically, I've been working for, helping large companies build their security posture, keeping them safe. But then I realized one day that I really don't care if they get hacked. This is being recorded. So, I mean, honestly, I don't care if a large organization gets hacked, because they have smart people working for them that will fix it, right? They have teams that are out there that's their job, is to make sure that they don't get hacked, and if they do get hacked, they help repair. But what about my mother-in-law, right? What about your mom, your dad, right? Your grandparents? What happens when they get hacked, right? I would be willing to bet that in this room, if your mother gets hacked, she's going to call you, right? And you're going to have to do that painful tech support over the phone, trying to walk her through. And and you're like, no, pick up the mouse, right? And she's using it like a foot pedal or something, right? And so my focus has really been working on the average user, right? Because I think for all of us, right, we're probably in that 5% of the population that understands security, right? And we get kind of stuck in this jargon, right? We get stuck in using these terms that everybody knows, that everybody in the security industry understands. But we forget that other people don't, right? So security has to be approachable, and it has to be very easily used by the common person. And because, I take my dad, for example. My dad now drives a a Prius. We were just talking about Teslas earlier. Drives a Prius, has a Roku box for his streaming, like he doesn't do cable anymore. Just got an iPhone, but he still sends me emails in all caps. Right? It's just everything is caps lock. And he does it because he knows that he needs to use technology. It makes his life easier, but he doesn't know how to operate it. When things happen, he calls me, right? So now my goal is to make sure that my dad never calls me about security, because I want to help him understand, using fairly basic terminology, what are the concerns about security. So that's currently what I'm doing right now, and that's part of my group product manager title, is that I'm actually working on a product that will help that, and will help bring enterprise-level security to the average person. So enough about me, unless you have questions. We'll have questions at the end, so think of some good questions. Let's talk about my mouse not working as a remote. So, smart homes, right? You see more and more things being connected, right? I have a smart thermostat at home. I have the Ecobee thermostat, which I think is a fantastic device. But a lot of these devices are basically fairly simple platforms. They're Android or they're Linux-based. They're connected to the internet. They have a lot of functionality built into them to make our lives easier. So, mine will let me, it's hooked up to my phone. It uses my phone as a location sensor, so it knows that when I'm coming home, to adjust the temperature so that when I get home, the temperature's a little bit lower. It's nice and cool. But what if, let's say it's a nice hot day. It's 38 degrees out. Then you want your indoors to be nice and cool and relaxed. But then let's say you get home, and this is on your thermostat, right? So it's set it to 37, right? And your thermostat's been hacked, right? And even worse, you get a little message there. It says, Pay 100. Oh, I should have changed this to euros. Sorry about that. Pay $100, or your temperature stays at 37. Right? What would you do? Right? What would you do if that happened? Like a lot of us, I think, like personally, I would pull it out of the wall and reflash it, right, and start from scratch, and then write an angry email to the manufacturer. And really, like, I'll be honest, I would see if I knew anybody within Intel that knew who the manufacturer was and had a relationship, so I could find the person to call and yell at. But the average person, if they see this, they're going to freak out, right? It's game over, right? And so you think, okay, maybe I can deal with 37, right? But what if the next stage gives you a little ticker, right? It says, all right, time until the temperature increases, 24 hours, right? Next, tomorrow it's going to be 40, or and it's going to keep going up. And it seems funny, right? But these are the sort of things that we have to look out for. And again, it's one of those situations where if you're a computer literate person, you know what to do. But you really forget, you have to remember that not everybody is, right? So, is everybody familiar with DEF CON? Yeah? Thanks. So DEF CON is fun. Like, typically it's DEF CON and Black Hat are tied together. And I always look at Black Hat as the professional side of things, and then DEF CON is all of the other, right? The seedier style, the stereotypical hacker conference, right? Lots of people who don't have regular employment or have face tattoos and whatnot. But so DEF CON last year, I was walking around, and DEF CON has a lot of villages, right? And it's basically like, it's a small area. It's like a room that is dedicated to, kind of showing off what are some of the things you can do with like a particular area of security. And they encourage people to come in and try and join in and do some common coding, and they teach each other. I had met a few years ago, I went into the lock-picking village, where they actually have a bunch of lock picks and locks sitting around where you could practice and learn how to pick locks. And I totally got sucked in. Like I had planned this whole afternoon of all the talks that I wanted to see. I didn't do any of them. I sat there like picking locks for like 4 hours because it was so fun. But that's kind of the feel at DEF CON. And so they had a number of villages, and one that they've been doing the last couple of years has been an IoT village, right? An Internet of Things village. So I want to show you some of the session titles that were there at the IoT village. Exploiting a smart fridge, right? Interesting. Picking Bluetooth locks from a quarter of a mile away. Right? This is one that really bugs me because I really want a smart door lock on my front door, but the technology is just not there. The security is not quite there yet. And it drives me crazy because I really want to be able to just walk in and open my door with it, automatically unlocking. Another one, hacking popular drones. And I don't know if you guys saw this in the news, but the UPS actually just demonstrated that they were able to launch a drone from the top of one of their trucks to deliver a package, right? And that's why hacking a drone becomes very interesting from a criminal perspective, right? Because if you've got these packages flying over on these drones, it's kind of a tempting target, right? Let's take one out. Now, granted, a lot of times, like the hacking side of it, you could realistically just shoot the drone, right? But you may damage whatever's there. And in fact, in my area, there's an Amazon hub nearby. So realistically, you could just sit a block away from the hub, watch the drones going overhead, and start hacking them. Thermostat ransomware and workshop. So this was the example I was using earlier. Is a realistic example because they actually were demonstrating hacking a thermostat, a smart thermostat. And this one was interesting. The hack they used actually was it was an Android device, and you could load in pictures, right? So you could put your own little background on the display for the thermostat. But the problem was they didn't check to verify that was just a picture, right? So anything that was on that card when they put it in would execute. So they basically just slotted in a piece of malware, it executed, and they gained root on that thermostat. And this one was my favorite. mostly from the title alone. Hot Wheels, hacking electronic wheelchairs. So this one was funny because there was actually, I'm walking down the hall and I see this guy like zooming by on like this wheelchair, and he was laughing. He thought it was the funniest thing, and he was like stopped, like, I mean, almost like, you know, like on the BMX where you do like an endo, right? Like he kind of like went up on the front, and there was somebody in the back with an Xbox controller, like controlling his wheelchair. And I was talking to the guy, and he said, look, you know, he's like, I'm in a wheelchair. Like the access port for my wheelchair is in the back. Like realistically, somebody could sneak up behind me, and I wouldn't see them, and hack my wheelchair. So I thought that was really interesting, and that's you know, it's just kind of an example of all of these things are starting to, you know, we've got this wave of technology that's coming in. And I don't know that as an industry we're necessarily prepared to deal with all of the security challenges that are coming up. And honestly, half the time I think people don't know what the challenges will be, right? They don't understand what they're going to have to be dealing with. So if we look back at our thermostat, our hacked thermostat, I mean, it exists as part of a larger ecosystem, right? You have probably got your smart thermostat. But where's that going to connect to, right? So a friend of mine asked, he said, hey, okay, I get it that you can hack the thermostat, but what is somebody really going to do, right? Yeah, they could do ransomware, right? And they could crank up your thermostat and make your life uncomfortable. In fact, they did that everybody familiar with Mr. Robot? Is that popular in Portugal? I love the show. It's like a very realistic, I think they have a very realistic approach to hacking. Granted, a lot of things, just to let you know, a lot of the things happen a lot quicker than they normally would. You know, there's some scenes where he's just like da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and like he's got the hack done. We're like, okay, that would have probably been about over the course of 3 hours as like trial and error to try and get it in. But the core concepts are good. So they, in fact, actually, you know, use that as part of a way to drive somebody out of their house, right? They turned the AC way down, had the lights flashing on and off, had the alarm going. And it was a big annoyance. But my friend said, okay, aside from that, what can you really do with a hacked thermostat? Well, what's the thermostat going to connect to? Anyone? Phone, right? What else? What's the typical communication going to be? Through your router, right? So let's say you've got a hacked thermostat. It's connecting and communicating regularly to the router, right? The router is the gold mine, right? That's the gatekeeper of your network. So if you can get an attack that compromises that router, then you've got access to your phone. You've got access to data on your laptop. And all of these other devices that start, you know, being, you know, smart enabled, right? You can take advantage of these, right, by having that first footprint. So it's all about making that first entry into your network, right? Because you think about your home network as your safe place, right? You think about, you know, you always hear don't do online banking when you're at a coffee shop, or, you know, wait till you're home, right? And people always say wait till you get home because there's a belief that you're going to be safe because you've got to protect a network that you probably set up yourself. But when you start getting these devices that are connecting to the inside of your network, that could be easily compromised. That network's no longer that safe, right? And the problem that you run into with a lot of these devices is that there's the concept of a minimally viable product, right? And what that means from a manufacturing perspective is that what's the least amount of work I can do to get a new product launched and being sold to the consumer, right? And I can guarantee you that security is rarely on the list of things that they can do before they launch that product, right? So you've got all of these products that are going out that have gaping back doors, right? They have these gaping holes in them that are just waiting to be exploited, right? And it becomes very tricky and becomes very dangerous. And again, the question, like after I explained this to my friend, like went through this whole process, he then came back and he said, okay, well, yeah, but so what, right? Like, so if my smart fridge gets hacked, All right, somebody's gonna like shame me because I have a lot of like ice cream in my freezer, and they're gonna like mail my doctor and let him know that I'm not eating right. Well, no, but once you get these devices hacked, then you've got a malicious device on the network, but then you also have a tool, right? So are people familiar with the Mirai botnet? All right, so this was a big, for those of you that aren't, this is a big botnet that went through in October of last year. And I remember it being in October because I was actually at Disney World with my family, and so I was very purposely turned off my, my email, my work email, wasn't getting anything. And my brother-in-law called me and he said, hey, is the internet broken? I'm like, I don't know, is the internet broken? I'm like, yeah, fundamentally there's huge issues and he goes, no. Like, he's like, I can't connect to Netflix, right? And for him, that was a big deal, right? He like couldn't connect to Netflix. And what had happened is that there were, now the numbers are argued back and forth. I've seen numbers as low as 100,000 and as high as 500,000. But basically, we'll just ballpark and say there were 200,000 IoT devices, right? This consisted of things like light bulbs and webcams and nanny cams and actually cable boxes and DVRs, right, that had been taken over and were being used to broadcast a distributed denial of service, right, against major websites. Now, there was a precursor that had gone on that was kind of the test, and that was against a couple sites. One was against a site called Krebs on Security. The other one was against the OVH, which is a large ISP in France. And they were detecting a botnet that was over a terabyte per second of traffic, right? And this was a distributed denial of service attack. And you take a look at kind of the highlighted, well, you lose a little here, look on the side monitors. You can see the number of cameras and DVRs that were causing all of this traffic, right? And what's interesting, so if you look at the overall number and how much traffic was being deployed, it came down, if you did the math and assume 200,000 devices, it came down to an average upload speed of about 7 megabit per second upload, right? Doesn't sound like a lot. That actually does sound like a lot. 5 years ago, it would have sounded huge, but now it's not so much. But the average upload speed globally is 7.6 megabit per second, right? So basically, these devices were tapping out the upload of these home networks, right? And I will tell you, the number one way to get a person to be concerned about security is to make it where they cannot reach Netflix, right? When the consumer starts being, inconvenienced, right, because their device has been hacked, that's when it starts becoming a concern to a lot of people. And so these devices were being used as a part of a huge botnet to basically attack whoever. And now there was a bit of time where you could actually rent the botnet for about $7,000 a week and use it to launch attacks at whoever you want. If you have, maybe you applied for a job at a company and they denied you, right? So it's worth $7,000 to attack them because I hate them, right? Like, whatever, right? And so that's the point where we're at, where we've got these devices that are being connected that don't have security or don't have adequate security, and they're being used for malicious purposes. The interesting thing about the Mirai botnet is that there was actually not an exploit. Technically, yes, there was an exploit, but there wasn't any malware. What they were doing is they were using default username and password to log in and then execute commands. Right? So it wasn't any advanced zero-day malware, right? It wasn't some brand new hacking technique that nobody had ever heard of before. It was using bad security practices to get in and take over these devices. Right? So it's a huge issue, right? And it's something that I think we all really, really need to think about. Because malware, in general, just continues to grow. Right? So we're currently processing our totals for Q4. So these are the numbers for Q3. But the overall malware, and this is from our labs team, the overall malware that we saw actually dropped about 21% from the previous quarter. which sounds good. That's positive, right? But really what it does, what that signals is that there's more effective malware, right? Because if malware gets stopped, right, what's a malware writer going to do? They're going to go and write a new one, right? But if it gets through, they're going to keep using that same piece of malware as long as they can so they can get as much money or as much damage as they possibly can before they have to go and write a new one. So what that dip tells me is not that it's dropping, not that the numbers are declining because people are no longer interested. It's telling me that this malware is working, right? Whatever's currently out there is effective enough, they don't need to write anything new. And if we look at the overall total, we're up at 644 million unique samples of malware. That's in our total collection of all the malware that we've tracked down. So it's been a huge growth, and it's something that continues to grow. And it's been, if you look at the overall growth, it's 29% in the past year. So overall, the arc continues. We're just on a down quarter. But what you should take from this is that if you go into security, you will have a job, right? Because this is making it easier for people to want to spend money on security because they're seeing how much is out there and they're being impacted by it. And what's interesting is that mobile malware is going crazy, like absolutely crazy. We've got, so over the past year, it was a 138% increase. The previous year, it was a 255% increase in mobile malware. And a lot of that you can attribute to people using, basically half of the web searches or half of the web surfing that people are doing is on a mobile device, right? My wife rarely uses her laptop. Frustrates me because I got her a nice Surface Pro, that I thought, oh, this will be great. She's on her phone. And the other angle, which I think is kind of interesting, is that partially, and I want to preface this by saying I think that overall this is a good thing, but last year, and you can see in the third quarter, it started climbing last year. Well, Google changed the way that they were doing security updates for Android, right? Which is, they went to a more frequent security update, which I think is a great model to do. But what happens when that bug or that piece of malware that you've written starts getting blocked? What do? You create new malware, right? So it's kind of like there's a little bit of a catch-22 in that by creating more security patches and creating more protection, it's actually causing more malware to grow because people have to now find new holes to get into those devices. So we're seeing a huge increase in mobile malware. And this next category, I love talking about. This is Mac OS malware. And I want everyone to notice I am displaying this from a Mac. So this is a completely unbiased opinion. But let's look at Q4 2014. Maybe about 7,000 individual pieces of malware, right? Again, that's not a huge number when you look at the, what would I say, 644 million for PC. But, there's always been this kind of myth, this urban legend that Macs don't get viruses, right? Do you guys hear that here? Do people say that in Portugal? Yeah, okay. But let's look at what the numbers tell us, right? So now we're middle way through 2015. We've got about 20,000, a little less than 20,000 individual samples. By the end of 2015, we were up to about 60,000, right? It's a big increase, right? And then we start moving into 2016, right? An even bigger increase. So what about, who wants to take a guess at 2016, Q3? Where do you think we're going to stop? Somebody yell when we should stop. No? Keep going? Stop? All right. Somebody, can you come up here and hold your hand, right where you said stop? I don't even remember, so I don't know if you're right or not. All right, so, see, and I tried to time this so it was nice and slow and like draw out the suspense. Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. How often do you get applause for just holding your hand out? That's pretty legit, right? Like, you should write that. He's like, "Dear diary, today people clapped for me because I held my hand out." No, dude, take a win. Take it as a win whenever you can. So Q3, that's over 140,000 new pieces of malware for the Mac. And it's pretty simple. I mean, it's over 215% last year. It was actually 500% the previous year. It's a really easy reason why. I mean, basically the Mac OS has become more popular, right? Macs are becoming more used in enterprises. People are starting to use more and more Macs, and you can see the trend continues to follow, right? Because as a hacker, you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, right? You want to write a piece of malware that's going to affect as much as possible, right? That's why you don't see malware for like AS400 mainframes, right? I'm sure they technically do exist, but so as an OS starts getting more popular, then you start seeing more malware targeting that OS because there's more targets and there's more targets of opportunity. So that's, we're definitely seeing that increase with the Mac operating system. So if anybody says that Macs don't get viruses, you should laugh at this point, right? And make sure you tell them that no, they actually do get viruses. Maybe not as much. I mean, they're not up to this 64 million total yet, but we're still early on, right? We should keep continuing to see growth. Next comes my nemesis. I hate ransomware. Like if I had to pick one type of malware that I just despise, it's ransomware, right? Ransomware is, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it basically goes through and encrypts either files or it could actually encrypt your operating system. And basically you get a little pop-up that says, hey, you have to pay me X amount of euro, or typically like a Bitcoin, right? And if you don't pay me this, then I'm going to leave this file encrypted, and you'll never see it again, right? Unfortunately, we've seen ransomware starting to spread from just the consumer to things like healthcare, right? We've seen hospitals attacked by ransomware. There was a really big example, I think it was early of last year, where there was a hospital in Hollywood that they paid, I think, something like $70,000 because they were attacked by ransomware, and they paid it to get, to get unlocked. And people were very critical of them. They said, look, like you guys shouldn't have paid it, should have restored from backups, whatever. But they're literally dealing with life or death, right? So as a security person, I can't fault them for paying, right? Because they had to do what they had to do to get things back up and running. But ransomware is really nasty. So everybody if you haven't watched all of season 1 of Mr. Robot, just plug your ears. But remember when they did the huge attack, right? I'll speak very vaguely. Remember when they did the big thing at the end of season 1? They don't talk about it, but that was ransomware. That's what they were doing. They encrypted the files that were being used. I'm trying to speak very vaguely for people that haven't watched it yet. But that was ransomware, right? And you see the damage that did in that theoretical situation. But the thing I don't like about ransomware is that it's preying on people's fear, right? People see this pop-up that says, I'm going to encrypt this file and you'll never see it again unless you pay me. And automatically there's something visceral, right? And people want to not have that happen. And so you've got people like your parents or your grandparents or your aunts or uncles who are paying, $500 or 500 euros to get their computer unlocked because they don't know what to do. And so that's why, most of the other malware is just kind of annoying, but ransomware, I think, really hits at something very, very vulnerable in people. So I'm going to talk now about some of the areas that we're looking at from a futures perspective. Like, what are kind of some of the areas that we're looking at for security? And the first one, actually, we literally talked about this at lunch a few minutes ago. I didn't start the conversation. It just came up naturally. But let's talk about cars, right? Like automotive security. A few years ago, I was on a team that we were looking into how to hack a car, right? We ended up not publicizing our research because it turned out that the car we were using as our test bed was actually a big Intel customer, and we didn't want to embarrass them. So we talked to them and worked out, shared them our research. We also spoke with other automotive manufacturers to let them know what our findings were. But as we start seeing more advances in automotive technology, we're looking at things in the Netherlands and in Europe. They actually just did a test to have automatic cars or self-driving delivery trucks that were able to double the output of what they were delivering at about 25% of the cost, right? Because they had multiple trucks in a row. They were able to drive at a lower speed continuously, and they were able to stick together and take advantage of the aerodynamics of the devices or the trucks because they were all being controlled autonomously, right? And I like this picture because the guy's in the front, like, kicking back, driving his truck. But Road and Track, which is a big automotive manufacturer or magazine in the U.S., did a poll, and they found that 1 in 4 people would nap in a self-driving car, right? And I told my daughters this, and they were like, "Yeah, I totally would." And my youngest said, "I'd play video games in the car," right? And I can't fault them, right? But the concept of self-driving cars is becoming much more acceptable. But you have to realize there's a lot of systems in the background that are going to allow this to happen. So let's look at, you think about the things that you take for granted, right? The ability to have your navigation, show you where you need to go. As we start seeing it progress, we'll see, heads-up displays in vehicles. One of my coworkers bought a new Corvette, and it actually has like a heads-up display when you sit down, like you can see the speed and everything in the windshield. It's pretty cool. I don't know that it's worth the $125,000 for the car, but it was a cool feature. But what if you're late for a meeting, right? Or you're going to meet somebody, and you're in a new city, you have no idea where you're going, and you get a little pop-up on your navigation that says, "Hey, if you want to figure out where you need to go, pay me 1 Bitcoin, or pay me $50 or $5 or whatever." These are certain things that we have to really be thinking about because it's not far-fetched, right? Excuse me. As we see the things that have been going on with healthcare, and we've seen the prevalence of ransomware, this is a very real concern that people need to be thinking about. Another one that is causing me a lot of concern is actually industrial systems. We've seen, this has kind of been an early, if we look back at the attacks against the Iranian nuclear facilities with Stuxnet a few years ago, and we're looking at more internet-connected control systems. These sort of things, this critical infrastructure, is going to be at risk. It is at risk, right? We see a lot of attacks against connected devices, connected control systems. These are areas that are going to need a lot more attention from a security perspective in the coming years. Well, to be honest, they need that attention right now. And this one I really appreciate. So this was a patent that was filed about a year ago, or in April of 2016, for a self-implant, or not self-implanting, but an implanted contact lens, right, that would adjust to fix it if you wore glasses. The contact lens would actually be injected into your eye, and then it would automatically adjust so that you could focus on whatever you needed. And which I think is pretty cool. Like, obviously, like, I got my start because I read Cyberpunk, right? I enjoy this sort of thing. But the thing that concerns me is this little lightning bolt over here representing a Bluetooth connection, right? So you build this great technology, and one of the concepts is, let's control it with the Bluetooth connection on my phone, right? Well, Bluetooth is probably one of the most insecure sort of communication methods there is. Well, not 100%, but whatever. So, we think about hacking the infotainment system or your GPS. What about somebody hacks your eyeball, right? Like the first time I talked about this, I said, I never thought I would say the words, what if somebody hacks your eyeball, right? But, I mean, it's a possibility, right? This is obviously a very far-reaching thing, but it kind of shows what people are looking at. And they have to be paying attention because there are 327 new threats every minute, right? So right now, 327 new pieces of malware have been discovered, which is more than 5 every second. And this number has increased dramatically. I think about 10 years ago, I was looking at this number, and it was about, I want to say 17 a minute, right, 10 years ago. And now we've moved to 5 a second, right? So there's been a dramatic uptick in the number of new malware. But it's not just the malware that we have to be concerned about, right? There's the people side of things. So this data I got from the Verizon data breach report. They say that 63% of the data breaches that they observed involved a weak password, right? It's not an exploit, just a weak password. Because people are notorious about reusing passwords. The average user, average person, has about 27 different logins that they have to keep track of. Like, think about all the things that you log into in your daily life, right? I'm not going to ask for hands because I don't want to shame anybody, but how many of you repeat passwords? Probably quite a bit, right? And I admit, like, I have 2 that I use in a couple different places, but I actually, about 5 years ago, I moved over to using a password management tool, and I've not looked back. Like, if you ask me, I think I know 4 passwords out of my 117 passwords that I have to, like, maintain. One is my login to my password manager. The other is my email password for work, my login for work, and that's about it. I don't know. Like, somebody asked, "What's my Facebook?" I don't know. I have no idea because I use this password management tool and just keeps everything, keeps me from making these mistakes. Keeps me from using one of the top 10 worst passwords. So, anybody want to guess what the number 1 worst and most common used password is? Password 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. How many? Like, okay, so, like, clap if you think password is the number 1. Okay. What about 1, 2, 3, 4? All right. Seems about the same, right? All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is typically the top most used password. What's interesting, like, this one kills me, like, just football, like, just randomly, like, we use football as a password, and then baseball. And to be fair, like, password and 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of switch back and forth every year, like, as to which one. One of the things that was interesting was that I think it was number 63 on the list of most used passwords was actually this long random characters, like long string of characters. And I was like, that's really strange. But then I did some research, and it's actually the password that's hard-coded into a botnet. All right, so the botnet was using the same password everywhere, and it showed up on the list. And because I'm a fan, I had to figure out how long it would go until I saw Star Wars as a password. Number 25, Star Wars, ladies and gentlemen. So if your password is one of these passwords, it needs to not be. All right? You go change it right now. I see, like, in the front row, he's changing his password right now. I see it. So phishing, right? Trying to get information out of you. So they did a recent study, showed that 30% of phishing emails are opened, right? Just generically. They just open, about 30% of them are opened. And of that 30%, 13% of those people click through the link. They click on the link that's in that email. And the average time between launching a piece of phishing email and clicking on the link, 255 seconds. right? So you may think that 13% is not a big deal, right? But you have to keep in mind we're talking in hundreds of thousands of emails, right? So if you're doing marketing and you get a 13% click-through rate, that's huge, right? Like you get a bonus, right? So this malware, these phishing emails are seeing tremendous impact because they're doing automation, right? And they're able to just send out hundreds of thousands of phishing attacks. This one killed me. So we found that 85% of successful exploits last year against large organizations were in the top 10 vulnerabilities, right? So these are vulnerabilities that everybody knows about, right? Like if you have a top 10 vulnerability, there's probably a patch. There's probably multiple patches. And a lot of these vulnerabilities are around for a long time. So what that tells me, and what that should tell you, is that people aren't keeping their systems up to date. They're not patching. They're not doing all of the security measures that they should be doing. And that's how the bad guys are winning. So how do you deal with all this, right? Education is key, right? You have to make sure that you educate everyone you know about security. I want everybody here to go and tell somebody they know that's not a security person, that's not a tech person, that they need to change their password, right? Just mention the slide with all the bad passwords, right? Just go in and say, change your password. Don't use Fluffy, right? Don't use your dog's name or whatever. Go and change the password. And it's little things like that. Like if you start educating your friends, your family, your coworkers on security, it's going to help, right? Every little bit is going to help. So the more people think about security, the less likely they are to be one of those people that clicked on the link in the phishing email. In fact, I got this phishing email came through into my work account, and I thought, oh, this is great. Like I want to screenshot this and see where it's going and see, like, so I can write a blog about it and use it as part of a presentation. And I clicked on the link, and it was like an actual test in my company. They're saying, oh, you clicked on a phishing email. You have to take this training. I was like, oh, like, come on. Like I literally told you guys to do that. So, and it's a business issue, right? Security, for a long time, when I first started, security was just part of IT. Typically didn't have its own budget, right? People didn't think about it. But if you think about it from a business perspective, as a business owner or a business driver, you have to plan for increase in cost, right? You have to plan for increase of cost of materials or increase of cost of salary. But nobody's planning for an increase in the amount of malware, right? So it's another factor that has to be taken into account as you start building out your model. So I want to wrap up really quickly with, let's look at my weird map of jobs. I want to pass on some of the things that have helped me move forward, right? So, and this is going to sound really weird anywhere else that's not like a tech area, but ultimately people are systems. Right? People behave typically in a fairly predictable way. So as you go through your career, you should always be looking for opportunities to expand, right? Don't expect to go in and from the day one get the best job in the world that you're going to have for the rest of your life, right? Unless the thing that you want to do is walk dogs for a living, more power to you, right? But go in expecting that you're going to have maybe a bad job, right? Something that's not fun and maybe not be engaging, but you should use that opportunity to start looking for other areas to expand into. Take extra jobs, take extra work if there's a project that's coming along that sounds interesting to you, help out, right? Find ways to help out and move around. Get out of your comfort zone, right? In the list there, you saw there was a marketing job that I did for a while, right? I'm like, I don't know marketing, but like it can't be that hard, right? I could, I was programming Arduino circuits over the weekend. Like what, like how difficult can it be to like write some marketing copy, right? And you know what? It's actually kind of difficult. But it was something that I'd never done before, and it's actually given me a broader insight into the overall business and how to get the message out to people about security. So think for things, just because it's something that you don't know how to do and you may not have the experience for, try it anyway, right? You're just going to grow. Right? You're going to learn from it. Nobody's going to fire you for trying something new. right? And if they do, you're probably at the wrong company anyway. Right? Create your own role. This one was actually fun because at one point, so I've been at the same company for about 16 years, and the way I do that is by changing jobs every few years. I get bored, and then I want to find something else to do. So a few years back, I went to my current boss at the time, and I said, hey, I'm really bored. Here's what I would like to do. And I had this full job description planned out. It was a job that did not exist at the time. I said, I want to do this. Can I do this here, or do I need to go to another company to do this job? And he's like, oh, no. Let's figure out a way to make it work, right? So look for ways to, if what you want to do doesn't exist, to create the job, right? And figure out a way to do it. Executives love it when people bring them a problem and a solution, right? If you just come up and say, oh, I'm bored, nobody cares, right? But if you say, I'm bored and this is how I solve that, and this is how it's beneficial to the company, they will listen to you. So look at people as systems to understand, right? This is one that I put up here because I know a lot of people in technology tend to be a bit introverted, right? And you always hear about the politics and the office politics and how you deal with other people. But if you look at it as something to learn and figure out, okay, how do I deal with this situation that is completely weird because I don't understand this, because I understand technology, if you look at it as a system to kind of figure out, then it becomes a challenge, right? And then it becomes something that you can learn, and it can help you grow. And this leads to this point: social interaction can be learned, right? By nature, I am an introvert, right? Talking to lots of people is tiring to me, right? But it's something that I use to do what I need to do, right? I want to get the message out to help people about security. I can't do that sitting behind a desk, right? So you can pick that up, you can learn it. If you look at it as a skill and as a system to be learned, there's really no stopping you, right? You can be like myself, like an introvert who would much rather be sitting at my, in my hotel room alone, like reading or working on something. You can learn to be more social, more outgoing, and that's really going to help your career tremendously. So, questions? Anyone? Yes. You had a question? Or are you just saying, all right.
Okay, I have a couple.
Uh-huh.
So the first one is, have you ever been hacked?
Have I ever, me personally?
Yeah.
No.
No?
And I'll tell you why not. I'm extremely suspicious, right? Whenever if I see a link that looks weird, I don't click it. I've had people, there's a current trend of getting people in like India to call and try and get you to install malware, and they say they're from the help desk, right? I got a call like that. My wife got the call and she handed it to me. I fired up a virtual machine in my lab, like remotely. I said, oh, hang on, I'm starting my computer up and I'm starting the virtual machine, and walked through the whole process, right? Because who's gonna call me telling me that, offering free support, right? So no, so I haven't been hacked, and that's not a challenge, right? I'm not saying that I'm a super genius, right? But I do simple things like I update my systems, right? I keep auto update on, I look for updates. If I know there's a security issue out there and auto update hasn't covered, I find it myself. But mostly I'm just really suspicious of anything that comes through.
Okay, thank you. I have one more. Remember when you talked about how many Mac malwares exist?
Uh-huh.
Do you have any statistic on the number of malwares per device in both Mac and PC?
Oh, per device.
Maybe it's more even.
Yeah, we don't really track it at that level. And the reason is because it's so sporadic, right? You can have somebody that's never had a virus before, right, would drive the totals way down, but then you may have one person that has an infected system. So we had an intern, and we were interviewing the guy for the internship, and he said, oh yeah, I want to learn more about, he's in high school, and he said, I want to learn more about security so that, because I've got this laptop at home, and it's just infected with, like, riddled with viruses. And I said, that's because you look at too much porn, right? And he was like, no, and it was so funny because he got so flustered. He's like, I don't look at porn. And I'm like, I don't look at porn on my laptop. I'm like, oh, do you use your phone for it? And he goes, no. So it's really hard to nail down a per device number.
Okay, thank you. One more. Why do you have a Mac though?
One, this has a better better specs than my previous laptop that was like double the width and size, and it's small, and it's a powerhouse, right? So that's why I use it, and I've got access to terminal, right? Like, so I can pull up a term window. I can run a lot of like the Kali Linux distributions. I can pull a lot of like BetterCap and like other security audit tools can run fairly easily on a Mac. Yeah, of course.
Any more questions?
I have a question. As a Linux user, we are used to use repositories for the programs we commonly use, and that it's fairly straightforward. People can use it, and we're like fairly immune to viruses if we only use the repositories. Of course, we can be exploited and such, but Android and macOS also have repositories, the App Store and Google Play, and they have filters, and Google and Apple take a look at what gets uploaded. But there are cases of malware which gets in and such. But with adequate control, can we simply prevent common people from getting malware other than exploits?
Yeah, I mean, you can basically, I think iOS is a great example, right, on the phone. You've got limited flexibility, right? You have to trade. There's always this fine line between security and usability, right? You can have an extremely secure device, but you disconnect it from the internet, right? And so you have to play that game, right? So I looked at the malware statistic for mobile. In that list, there were about 750 iOS pieces of malware, and those were all for jailbroken iOS devices, right? So the key and where we're seeing a lot of malware on Android is because the open nature of Android allows you to install apps from wherever, right? So you can sideload an app, you can install it from a third-party app store, and that's where a lot of those come in. Like Google and Amazon do a really good job of really like churning through and making sure that they remove malicious apps from their app store, but it's when people go outside that it starts becoming an issue. And the problem with a lot of the malware that we see is that it's not even running an exploit, right? It's basically installing and it says, hey, this application is asking for root level permissions, do you want to allow? And people always say okay, right? And so you can have the best security, but if people are still clicking okay and allowing it, there's not much you can do.
Then you quite look like an hacker. So how are you willing to trade the ability to install wherever you want to, for example, I suppose that on your computer you have the checkbox off for installing software from outside the App Store, but you don't really want like your parents to do the same. You want them to be safe, to be away from malware. But companies like Google and Apple and such want kind to prevent people from going outside of such stores because, to begin with, they want the monopoly. And security is also on mind. How do you think that an issue can be solved, the balance between security and the flexibility to do whatever you want with your computer?
No, and that just comes down to education, right? Like the earlier question, like have I been hacked, right? My system, like I install a lot of non-standard software on my systems, right? But I research them, I make sure that they're coming from trusted locations, I do code audits to make sure that there's not something hidden in the background. So it's possible, and I like some of the direction that Google's made with like the Chromebook, right? And having that kind of that isolated environment for people to use. So there's a lot of ways that you could solve it, and we just have to get people educated first about security, because then they'll understand, oh, if I have this restricted system, it's so that I don't get hacked, right? Most times people look at, oh, I have a restricted system, why can't I do everything I want to do, right? But it's that education needs to be there first, so they know why the system is restricted. Makes sense? Thank you.
We've got a question right here in the back.
Hey, I would like to ask you, what are your tips and advices for a startup cybersecurity company?
Get bought. No, you know, the advice I have is to find a need that's not being met, right? Or to find a need that's not being met well, right? If you're looking at kind of where the attacks are coming from, you have to understand that as you know, typically a startup is going to want to be purchased, right? They're either going to want to go public or be purchased by a larger company. And in order to do that, there has to be a really good fit into that larger company's ecosystem, right? At RSA last week, I had somebody came up and pitched this great like startup idea that he was working on, but there was nothing that we could do with it, right? It was competing with some of our apps. It was completely incompatible with some of our other methodologies. So you really have to find that good balance of something that's unique and something that's new, but also something that will fit in and make it more attractive to acquisition.
Thank you.
Or you just make it an open source and let everybody use it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
So I feel bad. This side has not had any questions.
Let's go for this side first. We have 15 minutes, okay?
Hey there, thank you. Okay, it's working.
Yeah.
Hello, thank
Hi.
you for your talk. And I'd like to ask two questions about the teaching part you mentioned, the awareness. So my first question is, I kind of seem to feel that some of the security solutions that you see marketed towards consumers are a bit of snake oil. And how would you deal with that? Or what's your personal opinion on these security solutions that claim to solve the problem for people, and they seem to think they're secured, but actually they're just in danger, or even more so?
Yeah, you know, the big problem with that is that people, excuse me, people get enticed by a low cost or by free or, you know, or whatever. But we've actually done studies that find that people find more value in a product that they've paid money for, right? So I know there are a lot of very good solutions out there like AVG and others that are free, but you know, sometimes there's a cost, right? You have to think about, why is this free, right? And there are other solutions that are just do a really good job of marketing, right, and make it sound like it's going to fix everything. But it's the standards, right? It's like the McAfee's, the trends, the semantics. Like they all have their downsides, but overall, it's a trusted environment, right? So you just kind of have to start with people that you trust and have had shown a good track record, and then move forward from there.
I'm just talking about this because there are a couple of ransomware which portray themselves as antivirus or security software. So
yeah.
My second question is related to something more general, which is sometimes when you're on a social network like Facebook, you sometimes see people saying, "Attention, there's this hack going on." So misinformation.
Yeah.
That's a problem that I see. But there's something else as well, that even when there is no misinformation, or when the information, what I mean to say, even when the information conveyed is done so in order to help the public, sometimes it's not conveyed properly.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I recall that some time ago there was a big push for people to look for a padlock on their web browsers, just to see if the site is secure, so that they could, for example, put their bank details on.
Right.
But these days, TLS is common, even on phishing websites, especially with Cloudflare, which has made it much more prevalent. So not only are we trying to raise awareness, but we have to compete with the marketing of some companies which portray themselves as solving security issues, but also this misinformation. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's tough, right? And it really comes down to trust, right? There have been, and even like a lot of people try to make names, right? They try to get their their company in the press or whatever. Like a big one that was going around was around Pokemon Go, right? There were a lot of like exploits and like social engineering around that. And I wrote an article about it that was like, look, here's what's actually going on, right? Here are the 3 things that are happening, and this is what you should be aware of. But I saw a ton of other things saying Pokemon Go is going to kill your dog, right? And like all of these things that are just, and part of that is that we've gone into a time when the sensational headlines, right, are what draws people, right? So I don't know that I have an answer for you, right? I think the answer I would have is that for your friends and your family, be the person they ask, right? I get that all the time. Like I get my aunts and uncles, everybody saying, hey, I saw this, do I have to be aware of it, right? And it's something that you just need to do, right? I think we all kind of have to suck it up for right now and be that person. But I think the long-term results will be positive.
Yes, but is it not cringeworthy when you see it on the TV?
Oh,
Like,
it totally is.
Yeah.
It totally is. It's super, and that's part of why I've taken this job is because I would hear things on TV. I'm like, that doesn't even make sense, right? So now I get to go on TV and say things that don't make sense. But yeah, unfortunately, you just gotta help your friends. Right? That's really the only answer I have for that one.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, of course.
So unfortunately, we are out of time for questions, but if there's anyone else that wants to ask Bruce any questions, there's a particular area in the venue
sure.
for questions, the showcase area that's just right
Okay,
there.
perfect.
Thank you, Bruce, for your
Right.
presentation. You deserved
you.
it. A big round of applause.